From a small coal Canadian town with 30,000 people to making over $25 million online in under 3 years. I now live the life of my dreams in Dubai. My name is Brook, Hiddink, and this is my story. So I live here in a beautiful penthouse on the beach overlooking the palm. I'm married to a beautiful wife and we just had our first baby boy 2 days ago. So I set up a trust or a family foundation that holds multiple millions of dollars in investments for my family and the future. And I've done all this and we're from zero to all this in 3 years. So you can see right here on the screen, a texting conversation with my mom from 2021, where I was literally stressing out over an extra $35 for a train we got. So the point of this is not to brag. The point of this is to show you that you can do this and you can live the life of your dreams too. Whatever reasons you tell yourself why you can win, they're not real. So in this video, I'm gonna give you behind the scenes on my story and exactly how I did it. So enjoy. So this is my story. So I grew up in a tiny Canadian town called St. Thomas, Ontario. Very small. It's like 33,000 people. Both my parents were born and raised there. They grew up there. There's really not much going on in St. Thomas, so it's not on the water or anything. Essentially, there's a big highway in Ontario that goes from Ottawa all the way through Toronto, all the way through Windsor, like into the US. But 20 to 30 minutes off that highway. So it's just like a landlocked city. There's nothing really around it. It's like 30,000 people, 40,000 people or so. Per capita, it's got the most drugs in Canada. The biggest claim to fame of the city is it had the biggest circus elephant in the world. I mean, it's the railway capital of Canada. So back in the day, there's a whole ton of train lines going through the city. So whenever you want to go somewhere, there's a pretty good chance you're going to hit like 2 or 3 trains. But anyway, this circus elephant got hit by a train. So there's the big statue of that elephant in the city. So that's probably like the most interesting thing about it. There's really not a whole lot going on. Not a lot of people with ambition and things like that. So growing up, we were very much just an average family, had an average house. Both my parents, they never were entrepreneurs. They never did anything athletic. They were pretty much just in this little town and grew up there. As a kid, I had a ton of energy. I was super hyper. So my mom ended up putting me in figure skating. And I ended up in the first year of figure skating, I won Skater of the Year for my age group because I would essentially skate away from the instructors and they couldn't catch me. So I'll just like dart around the ice. Everyone else is doing the drills. It's interesting how when you're a kid, you can see similarities when you're an adult. So that's just one thing. I did not like following instructions. I didn't like authority figures. I just wanted to go do my own thing, but I ended up being pretty good at it. That will come important in a minute. Growing up, my parents didn't really have a great marriage, I would say. Like there was not a lot of love being shown either way. And I didn't think anything of it at the time because it was all I knew, right? So growing up, I didn't know any different. Both my parents, they loved me to death, but I think any parent has imperfections and things that didn't do right. One of the best things that happened to me was I ended up getting a house very early. So I left home at 15 years old to pursue professional hockey. And then I never really went home after that. I did for a year or two during the pandemic, but when I was gone from university at about 18 years old, my parents ended up getting divorced while I was gone. So I wasn't at the home when everything happened. I ended up going home for the summer. And that's when I helped my mom move out by herself. And then she was working 2 or 3 jobs to support me and my brother, which was a very, very hard time in her life. We'll get back to that in a minute. That was essentially my early life. I grew up in a small town to a very average family, average house, nothing out of the ordinary about us. So not a single time did our family ever go on vacation together. We never went anywhere. So very much just like average across the board. So shortly after that, I ended up just going into like the competitive hockey in my town. And then once you turn 8, there's essentially like AAA, which is the highest you can play as a kid. So I ended up playing that a year up. So I got to play a year older than me. And I was playing with a whole bunch of people that are in the NHL today. And then I ended up getting really, really good at hockey. So for a while, from I would say age 12 to 15, 16, I was considered one of the best in the entire world. So I would beat Connor McDavid in points at tournaments. And I was like the captain of our team that had like Aaron Ekblad and all these other guys who are in the NHL now. I won a whole bunch of awards and stuff like that. And I think part of the reason for my success, just to be brutally honest, was I grew quite early. So I was like 5'9", 5'10", 190 pounds in grade 7 when I was like 12 years old. So I was like huge, almost like a man child going against all these other kids who are like 5'2", 5'3", 100 pounds. So that's one of the reasons why I was so good. I was still obviously skilled and stuff, but that was a big differentiating factor that would eventually later catch up to me. So yeah, I played a lot of hockey. I would play spring hockey. So essentially spring hockey, there's no city teams. You just go on whatever team you want. And that's where you can kind of get these super teams of all the best kids around the world. So I played on those. We ended up winning, I think 16 tournaments in a row. We were first place and with a ton of players who are in the NHL now. And then when I was 15, it's called your OHL draft year. So how it works is you have the NHL, which is the highest league in the world. And then in Canada, there's the OHL, which is the Ontario Hockey League, the Western Hockey League, which is out west, and the QMJHL, which is the Quebec League and all out east. So you have these 3 junior leagues below the NHL, and then you get drafted out of those leagues. It's the equivalent of in the US, you have NCAA. So all the best players in the US go to the United States National Development Team, and then usually off to college, and then to the NHL. But in Canada, you go to these junior leagues. So when you're 15 years old, that is your draft year. So all the way up when I was like 8 to to when I was 15, I was playing up a year every year. So I played a year older. So that team I was playing up a year on was very, very good. We would always be first place. Bo Horvat was on my team, a bunch of players who done really, really well. So I think on that team in the final year, we had over 10 people get drafted into the OHL, which is I think like the second or third most of any team in Canada. But obviously since I was actually playing Europe, I wasn't eligible for the draft. So then I had to make a decision the next year. Did I want to go play on the same team? So essentially the team that was like St. Thomas, where I'm from, in the surrounding cities, was called Elgin Middlesex County. So those are the counties. It's all the cities in those counties teams. But the team for my age was not very good. I had to make a decision whether I wanted to go play on that team that wasn't very good or go try and move to Toronto and play on one of the top teams. The rules around this are crazy. So you can't just live in St. Thomas or London, where I'm from, and go play on a team in Toronto. In the winter, during the regular season, you can do that in spring hockey where there's no boundaries. But in order to do that for the winter team, so my draft year, if I wanted to go move to Toronto, play on a best team, at the time, my parents were still together. So they would have had to almost like fake a divorce. So then one of my parents could have their home in St. Thomas and the other one could have a residence in Toronto, and I would be eligible to play in Toronto then. That was one option. Or the other option was they had to sign guardianship of me when I was 16 over to this grandma in Toronto, who was essentially going to be my legal guardian, which then I could live at her house, who was my billet, who essentially take care of me and I would play on the team. We ended up actually initiating that process. I wanted to go to Toronto and it was taking forever. So we had to go apply to the court to get this guardianship approval, and it ended up taking like a month over. So eventually I just said, you know what, screw this. I don't want to like lose half my year trying to do this. I'm just go play on the Elgin Middlesex team for my own age. As I said, we weren't very good. I think there was like two of us drafted, 2 or 3. Versus over 10 when I was playing up a year on the year before. So I ended up getting still drafted in the first round, which was amazing considering how bad the team I was on. We didn't go far in the playoffs. I didn't really have any really good line mates that I played with, so we didn't go far in tournaments or anything like that. But I still ended up getting drafted in the first round. I'm 21st overall to the Niagara Ice Dogs. Now, as soon as you're a first round pick, it means you automatically get what's called a gold scholarship package. So all your room, your books, your boarding for 4 years of undergrad is completely covered. So I'll get into that in just a minute. But I ended up getting drafted first round. When you're a first round pick, usually what that means is the next year you go play in the OHL. If you're a second round pick or later on, you usually go play a level lower, like junior B or one of these other junior leagues for a couple of years to try and work your way up to the OHL. But since I was drafted in the first round, I got to play in the OHL on my first year. But during that year was actually an NHL lockout. So what that means is the NHL players were on strike trying to get a better bargaining agreement so they get a better contracts. So a lot of the people who would have been in the NHL were actually still in the OHL. So that made it very, very hard for me to get playing time. So in my first year when I was 16, Dougie Hamilton, who's been like 10, 12 years in the NHL now, Ryan Strome, Brett Ritchie, played multiple years in the NHL. We had like 3 or 4 of these key guys who would have been in the NHL who were still playing with us because of that lockout. They were still young enough to play in the OHL, but they would have been in the NHL if the league was playing. All the NHL players went on strike, but since they were still young enough to play, they just came down and started playing in the OHL where they were before. So that made it very, very hard for me to get playing time in my first year because we had these absolute all-stars and I was just 16 years old. In the few years before that, I had had like 1 or 2 concussions. The weird thing about concussions is when you get one, you don't really know when you're going to get better. You're kind of just waiting. You kind of just feel in a constant daze. You have your ears ringing, your head hurts, and there's not really a timetable for you to get better. So I had in my final year of junior, I had 2 pretty bad ones. There was a point where I couldn't leave my room for a month. So I was in like a dark room. You can't look at screens. You're just like wearing glasses for like a month straight, and you're just kind of waiting to get better. So that was really, really hard mentally. I ended up getting better, of course. And then in my first year of junior, first year with Niagara, I had another one. It wasn't as bad, but still like the more you get, the worse and worse they get each time, and the harder it is to recover. So I worked very, very hard that summer after my first season in the OHL, trained really hard, went back to training camp. I think I had a pretty good start. I think I had like 7 points in my first 10 games, something like that, which is pretty good for a second year player who didn't play at all first year. At that point, I still wasn't getting a ton of playing time. I still felt like I wanted a new start. So essentially my agent asked for a trade. And then one day, essentially what happens is, imagine I'm 17 years old. I've already been living away from home for over a year for hockey. Your team usually goes on road trips every weekend. So then the second year, I played my first 10 games. I was doing pretty well, but I still wasn't getting as much playing time as I thought. So my agent asked for a trade for me. So essentially one day I just showed up to the rink for practice like you usually do. Every morning you usually go in practice, skate around, shoot pucks around just for fun, do a workout, and then you have a more hard practice in the afternoon. So yeah, I showed up to the rink one day and my bag was just packed on the floor, which meant I had been traded. So the team I got traded to, which is called Plymouth, at the time they were on a road trip. So Plymouth is by Detroit, but they were on a road trip way up North Ontario in Sudbury. I grabbed my bag, went home, threw all my stuff in a suitcase, a hockey bag, jammed it in my tiny little Ford Focus, 17 years old, and then I had to drive all the way up 8 hours to Northern Ontario to meet the team I had been traded to on this road trip. So essentially they're all on a bus. The team I got traded to was all traveling together on a bus, and I'm just like following the bus in my little white car for 3 games. I did not have a good experience in Plymouth. So we had a crazy coach there. So just give you a couple examples. A couple months after I got traded in the OHL, you get a 2-week break at Christmas. So our final game before Christmas, we're on a road trip right before Christmas. The second to last game before the road trip, we had a bad loss. So I think we lost 5-1 or something like that. And usually after the game, what happens is you go on the bus, bus, and then you have like your meal on the seat of your bus, and then you drive to the next city, sleep at the hotel, and then play whatever game you have next. So after the game we lost 5-1, we all went on the bus after, and there were no meals. Because of the game we lost, he actually took our meals, threw them in the dumpster. So you have to think, we just played a 3-hour hockey game. We're on the road, no meals. And we have a 4-hour bus ride to the next city. Not only that, he turned up the heat on the back of the bus full blast to like make it uncomfortable for us. So we were all like in our boxers, no shirts on, sweating in the back of the bus, no food, on a 4 or 5 hour bus ride to the next city. Anyway, we get to the next city, we check into the hotel, still no food. We haven't eaten after the game. The next morning, we're supposed to have breakfast and then go to the rink to practice. But at breakfast, 2 guys on the team showed up late. So then the whole team, he canceled breakfast. We haven't eaten in like a day now. We had played a game the night before. So we canceled breakfast and we went right to the rink and he bag skated us. So just like no pucks, just down and back over and over. And then after the bag skate, we did that for an hour and a half, 2 hours. Then we had to run stairs around the rink, like as punishment. And keep in mind, we haven't eaten, we have a game that night. And then finally, I think after that, he gave us lunch and we had a game to play that night against the best team in the league. We ended up winning 2-1. So I guess what he did worked, but it was still crazy. So that was the last game before Christmas break. Then we had about 10 days off, and then we had a game New Year's Eve, right when we came back. Then New Year's Eve again, we lost. So essentially what he did was he gave us a New Year's Eve a curfew of 10 p.m. So every night you have curfew. So you have to like be in your billet's house, the family who takes care of you. And you have to like call from their house phone saying, hey, I'm home, confirm that you're home from the house phone so they know you're not out partying. So we gave everyone a 10 p.m. curfew. And the next day we had to be at the rink at 5 a.m. for another bag skate. So essentially back and forth across the ice, skating, working out without any break. Those are the couple things that guy did. Yeah, I had another bad concussion there in Plymouth. Like I was not enjoying Plymouth. Well, I think I had taken Niagara for granted. So the nice thing about Niagara is there's a university there. So after a big win, the coach would let us go out to the bar or go out to parties and have some fun. It was a very fun place to play. And like I said, I had a rough first year with the NHL lockout, not a lot of playing time. Second year, I came back pretty good. So in hindsight, I should have just stayed and stuck it out because Niagara was a lot of fun. It was a great place to play. We had our little tiny rink at the time. It was like an old arena where every game was packed. So it was like seats were sold out every game, a good little university town. It was a lot of fun. Where the team I got traded to in Plymouth, there was no fans because it was an American team. Like no one really cares about American junior hockey. The drinking age is obviously 21 in the US, so there was no bars or anything to do. There was University of Michigan and Michigan State. We're both like an hour away, which was too far to really go hang out there. There was not much fun stuff to do. We had this super hard ass coach. I wasn't really having a good time. And this is when I started to dislike hockey, I would say. I had a couple bad concussions that year that put me out for 2 or 3 months. By this point, I was having so many of them that it was really affecting my ability to play. When you have these concussions, like I said, you don't really know when they're gonna get better. So I would like have one, and then when I would come back and start playing again, you always just kind of have it in the back of your mind. So at this point, I probably wasn't performing very well. I wasn't having fun. I didn't even really deserve to play. So the lack of playing time I was getting was almost warranted. So then again, healed that summer, worked out hard and stuff, came back for a third year, and it was very much the same thing. So I said, you know what, I've already had all these concussions. I'm not having fun. I hate living in this place in Plymouth in the US. Everything sucks. There's nothing to do. I have this hard ass coach. Hockey's not fun. So essentially what I decided to do was I wanted to go start university. When I went back for the third year, I was already like 10 games in when I made the decision. I just decided for the rest of that year, I was gonna go play junior with some friends closer to home on like a junior B team. And that was a lot of fun. So I went back and played in Stratford, which is like a junior B team in Ontario. I did pretty well again. Didn't play great, but I think the concussions and stuff had caught up to me by that point. Had a lot of fun. I think we lost in the finals, but played in a good team, great fans every game. That was essentially my hockey career. And at that point, like I said, I had all these concussions. I thought, I'm clearly not gonna make the NHL at this point. So I wanted to start university because one thing I didn't want to do, which happened to a lot of my friends, which is really sad to see. I think there was quite a few people I know who knew they weren't gonna make the NHL, but they just held on to the hockey dream. So now even to this day, they're like 28, 29 years old with no schooling, no degree, and they're making like $20,000, $30,000 a year in these European countries, like playing in like Slovakia or Hungary, or in these like lower hockey leagues in Eastern Europe. And they don't really have a choice because they just held on to the hockey dream for so long. They didn't want to let it go. And now they're in this weird situation where they have no backup. They don't have any school, they've never run a business, and they're like 30. They're getting married, they have wives. They're just in this limbo state. I think in hindsight, I applaud myself for being at least self-aware enough to know that I wasn't going to make the NHL and I needed to do something different. So that's sort of my hockey career, which didn't end smoothly, but it gave me a lot of really important lessons that I've applied in business. So my discipline, it kept me out of trouble, taught me work ethic, and being very, very good at something when I was young. So as I mentioned before, when I was super young, I was one of the top players in Canada, best of the best. So I think once you're at that level in something, you always crave, it really helps your self-confidence. So if you can do it in one area, I always crave to do that in business. And I think even now, like I probably make financially more than 95% of NHL players, and I've only been an entrepreneur for 3 years. And the thing I love the most is a lot of NHL players, like even the best of the best, like the Connor McDavids of the world, when they're 35, 40, they're going to retire, and maybe they can get into coaching or being a GM or stuff like that. You see a lot of the top players do that, but that's like the very, very few. Like Steve Yzerman is a GM of the Red Wings. You have like Brendan Shanahan and the Leafs. Like the top players can go do this stuff. But the thing about being an entrepreneur is you can do this till you're 80, 90 years old. And honestly, I love being a business owner and entrepreneur 100 times more than I ever loved hockey. So a lot of the character traits and stuff, I don't think it was a waste of time because it gave me a lot of important life lessons. It got me out of the house early, which I'll explain why it's important in that. It taught me a lot of super important things, competitiveness, drive, discipline that have translated perfectly to business. But I think the key thing there and the right decision I made was I left and I started to pursue a different path quite early on when I was still 17 or 18, when I could have just kept pushing and pushing, and a lot of my friends did. I think I made the right decision to change my focus and to be honest with myself that I wasn't going to be a top NHL star when I was. So when I started going to school, it was probably the darkest period of my life. I had never applied myself in high school or elementary school or anything like that. I was always a smart kid, but I would never apply myself. I had like a 70% average in high school or something like that. For some reason, I thought that I could go to university to be a doctor, like wanted to go to med school. So in my first year, I applied to go into this school out east called St. FX for sciences. It's quite easy to get in there, even though I had a lower average. They look at you more holistically. So because I got drafted high, hockey career, everything like that, I ended up getting into this school. Because I was a first round pick, my first 4 years of tuition, room and board, books, everything was covered. So it was essentially free. And they would actually give me an allowance of like $5,000 to $10,000 a year. So I didn't really have to go in debt at this point at all. And they would even cover summer school as well. So at this point, it was probably the darkest period of my life because every weekend for the past 12 years, ever since I was like 8 years old, I had been going to hockey tournaments and playing hockey games. I would never really go out. At this time, I started partying a lot. I would go out 3 or 4 days a week. I remember I would go out to the bar the night before an exam and show up hungover to the exam. Meanwhile, I'm telling myself I wanted to get into med school. Yeah, obviously when you're drinking a lot, going out partying and stuff, it's fun, but it really started having an effect on my mental health. Like in the first year, I got like a 60% average or something like that. And that was actually the same year where my parents divorced. So my parents got divorced while I was gone at school, partying, whatever. And I got a 60% average. That following summer, I was working in London where I'm from. So I went home to London where I'm from, had an apartment in the summer with a buddy, and I was doing like landscaping, cutting grass, things like that. But that's actually when I read my first ever personal development book. So it was called Who Says You Can't You Do by Daniel Chidiac. So that was the first time in my life I ever started setting goals for myself, diving into the self-help space. So I think like self-help, a lot of people, it does them more harm than good because they just get obsessed with it, like reading a self-help book, but never actually taking action. So I started actually applying goal setting for myself for the first time in my life. So I remember writing down, it was just like, if you could have anything, no matter what it was, what car would you drive? And I remember writing down, I was going to drive a Lamborghini. And it just felt so foreign to me. It was so different than who I was at the time. But I started applying that goal setting to school. The next year, I went from 60% average in year 1 to 91% average in year 2. So over a 30% increase. Now, there's a really good school in London called Ivy Business School. So how Ivy Business School works is you get in based upon your first 2 years. So you have your first 2 years and then you go for your last 2 years. It's an undergrad, but you do your first 2 years and then your last 2 years at this business school. So I applied and I didn't get in because my first year grades were so low. My second year grades were excellent, but they combine them and look at your overall average for your first 2. Because of the first year being so bad, I didn't get in. As I said before, when I was out east at this school in St. FX, it wasn't a great academic school. I was partying a ton. So even though I didn't get in Ivy Business School, I still decided I wanted to transfer school to Western. So that's the closest university where I'm from. A lot of my hometown friends and stuff are there. I got married last summer. My best man at my wedding, I actually moved in with him. We were roommates. I started going there for my third year. And my third year, I did even better. So I got a 92% average at a way better school. So at this point, I had the really bad first year and then 91, 92% averages in years 2 and 3. I should have mentioned before, but in year 2, when I started setting goals and stuff, I transitioned into business. So in year 2, when I got the 91% average, I was in business. And then year 3, I was also in business. I knew I wanted to do business, but I didn't want to go be an investment banker or anything like that. Ever since I started reading self-help, I wanted to be an entrepreneur. And I was big into the show Suits at the time. The next best thing, since I didn't get in that business school, is I thought law school sounded cool. And yeah, like to be brutally honest with you, like it just sounded cool in my head. I probably, for my own ego, was the reason I went to law school. It just sounded, I wanted people to say, I'm in law school. So I applied after third year to law school, and it's very, very hard to get in without an undergrad. But because my years 2 and 3 were so strong academically, and I had this really interesting background as like a semi-professional hockey player, first round pick, I actually got in law school after my third year, which is very, very hard to do. But I got into a school called Queen's University, which is in Kingston. It was a great, great school. I went there for my first year of law school. I had a lot of fun. I met a lot of great friends, but that was actually when the pandemic happened. I started law school in the fall of 2019, early spring of 2020, a little bit over halfway through the year, the pandemic happened. They shut down all in-person classes at the time. I was living in this tiny, essentially basement of a house in Kingston. But at that time, it was when I, for the first time since I was 15, I moved back home to St. Thomas to live with my mom. So I was back home now. I think at the time I would have been 24. So it would have been the first time in like 9 years I was living at home during the pandemic. And I had a great time at Queen's. And then going into second year of law school. So how law school works is you have 3 years, year 1, year 2, year 3. You do your recruitment at the beginning of year 2, and then you get the job at the beginning of year 2, and then you finish your second year, you finish your third year, and then you go work at the firm after your third year that you got the job for in year 2. So it's really weird. You only have 1 year of grades when you get your job for after law school. But because the pandemic, they pushed the recruitment to the beginning of the third year. In first year law school, I did quite well. I think I had like a B+ average. I wasn't on the dean's list or anything like that. But again, really started dialing in, focusing more and more, setting goals for myself. So my second year law school, Queen's was very up in the air. Like they were still saying they were going to have at-home classes, where Western, where I had transferred to my undergrad, and I did year 3 of my undergrad, their law school said they were going to be in person. So I actually transferred from Queen's Law School back to Western, which was literally like a 20-minute drive from my house at the time. Had a great time at Queen's. The only reason I transferred back to Western, where I had done my undergrad, was simply because they were going to have in-person classes. So in year 2 of law school, I again did amazing. So I was like top 5% of my class, the highest grade of my whole school in like 3 of my classes. Yeah, I did amazing. So then at the beginning of year 3, we had the recruitment that would have been traditionally at the beginning of year 2. So the law school recruitment process is crazy. So essentially you apply to like 30 firms and they have what's called OCIs. So OCIs are usually in person, where they have this room with like little huts where each firm goes, and then you just like go in for like quick 10-minute interviews and like circle around them all. And if you're a top candidate, a lot of firms will offer you OCIs. Because the pandemic was actually still happening in the beginning of year 3, they had them virtually. So I had like this OCI process virtually on Zoom. So I ended up getting like interviews with every firm I applied to. I went through that whole process and I got a job at the top law firm in Canada. So it's called Davies, Ward, Phillips & Viber. Amazing, amazing firm. Like if I wasn't an entrepreneur, I think I would probably work there. The culture of the firm is like, they want to be the best, somewhat intense. They work the hardest, they give the highest salaries, they attract the best talent. If you want to be the best of the best, that's where you go. So yeah, I got a job at this firm. It was going well. But I could sort of see, like I remember working and I would look at like the people ahead of me and I'd look at the partners, and it didn't seem like they had this life that I'd been sold. And they had like essentially like a Slack for the firm where you can see everyone working and message them and stuff. I remember seeing people working pretty much from like 6 a.m. till 12 p.m. every day. And they're only making like 150, 200,000 Canadian per year, which just seemed like a lot of work for that. So at the time, my undergrad was paid for, but law school, which is super expensive in Canada with living and everything like that, I had taken out like $170,000 line of credit to fund law school. So going to the third year, I was $170,000 in debt. So I asked my firm, hey guys, can I work during my third year of law school, just like part-time to start paying back some of my debt? And they said, no, essentially we can't, because if we offer it to you, we'll have to offer it to everyone, which made sense. Then I started looking for other ways to make money. So the first thing I tried was I would go on Alibaba, I would order like, those adjustable dumbbells where you can like change the weight and it will like be different weights. So I ordered a skid of like 30 of those. I drove my mom's tiny car to this warehouse in Toronto to pick them up. The bottom of the car was like bottoming out on the highway on the drive home. And I think I ended up paying like $40 each. And then I would sell them on Craigslist or Facebook Marketplace for $80. If someone bought one, I would drive around and like drop a few off at a time. And I made my first $2,000 or $3,000 online doing that. But obviously I found out pretty quickly that it was not scalable. So, and then I started looking into more e-commerce things where I wouldn't have to go sell my own products. So the first thing I tried was low ticket dropshipping. This time it would have been the fall of 2021. So this was actually during my third year of law school. Fall of 2021, started doing dropshipping, and I failed every store I tried. Not that I don't think low ticket dropshipping can work. I just had no idea what I was doing. So I failed selling like pet leashes, dog carriers, sink brushes. I tried all sorts of stuff. I think I had tried over 10 stores and I failed every one. I never made a sale. I never even sold a single item. I spent a few $100s on ads. And then I heard a podcast talking about high ticket. So I ended up buying a high ticket program, which I credit to kind of getting me off the ground. I learned a lot. I think there was some things that could have been done better with the program. Like there was very little coaching. It was just a course. The course was good, but there was very little mentoring or coaching. Ended up joining that. And then shortly after that, so my first niche that I wanted to start was called modern furniture. And I found out pretty quickly that a lot of the furniture suppliers aren't great. There's been a lot of people in my program do great with furniture. I didn't really know what I was doing. So I started with modern furniture, and then I didn't want to start over. It wasn't really working. So I thought, what can I sell that's like somewhat like modern furniture that I can pivot to on my existing store? So that's when I started selling saunas, and things took off pretty quick. So I made my first ever sale on October 21st, 2021 for over $14,000. In the next 39 days from October 21st to November 30th, we crossed 177,000. That December, we crossed 215,000. So we have to think, I'm in law school, I'm $170,000 in debt. when I graduate, I have a job at the best firm in Canada. My salary is an articling student. So what happens is after you graduate law school, you act as an articling student for a year, and then you become an official lawyer. So your articling student salary at this firm was $115,000. Most other firms are around 90 in Toronto, and that's Bay Street, like the highest of the high. So my firm was $115,000. So that works out to just under $10,000 per month. And here I am, I start this high-tech e-commerce store. In 3 months in December, I crossed over $215,000 in revenue. It was, I think, $20,000 to $30,000 profit at the time in USD. So whatever that would be, 30, 35,000 or 30, 40,000 Canadian, roughly. So it was like double or triple what I was going to make as a lawyer after I graduated. Ever since I started consuming self-help stuff, I read that book and then kept reading other books, listening to Andy Frisella's podcast, Ed Mylett's podcast, Tim Ferriss's podcast. I would obsess over this self-help stuff. But it was so weird because I knew I wanted to be an entrepreneur, but here I was living this like law school, traditional corporate career life. Like there was this huge internal identity conflict. And then finally I had this thing that started working for me. So I was like, I have it. Like, this is it. I'm going to go all in. And there's even texts from my mom. I'll put this on the screen, but I want to read it. It's so crazy looking back at this stuff. $275,000 in 2 months while trying to do way too many things. I have a chance to build a multi-million-dollar company. It's always been my dream to do so. And this text here was sent on December 15th, 2021. So 2 months after I made my first sale. Thought of working 80 hours a week for somebody else doing something that I hate makes me sick. Even more so because I have $170,000 in debt because of that thing that I'm working at. I cannot spend another day doing it because it makes me sick to my stomach. If I ever want to do law, I'm 1 semester away from finishing. If I ever wanted to, I will finish it and do it right. I cannot do 2 things at once. I'm going to do awful on my exams this semester because I simply don't care about them, and I do care about my business. I'm not going to waste the time and money to do terrible. So if I ever decide to do it in the future, I'll do it right. And then you can see my mom says, "Thank you for your honesty. I respect you, and I love you, and I'll always be your biggest fan." So she unconditionally supported me. And yeah, so essentially in the first 3 months, I crossed 215,000. So in the third month, I crossed 215,000. The plan was to drop out, but my mom really, really wanted me to finish school. So I told her, like, I'm not going to take out more loans and stuff. If you want to pay for my final semester, I will show up to the exams and pass the exams. So the plan was at the time that she was going to pay the final semester and I was going to go to the exams. Because this pandemic was still going on at this time, the classes were all remote, so there was no in-person classes. I was just working on my business the whole winter and I was going to show up to my exams in May. And you can see here in April, she's like, "Are you finishing Western this week?" Which is the law school I was going to. I said, "I'm not finishing. I thought you were completing the year." I said, "Nope. When did you decide?" I said, "I don't want anything to do with law." And essentially, school offered me the degree for free. I would tell them no, thank you. And then she says, "What's your long-term plan?" And I said, "You'll see." So within about 8 months of that message, I was able to retire her and she never worked a day in her life again. So this was in April of 2022. And I'm not recommending anyone do this, but at the time I was living with very little expenses. I didn't have a wife, I didn't have a family. So I knew myself and I knew if I put my own back against the wall, it would bring the best out of me. So that's why I decided to drop out. So at the time I had been able to pay off some of my debt with the money I was making from my e-commerce store, but you have to think every time you withdraw money from your business in Canada, you pay tax on it. So the more money I withdraw, I was paying it at a super high tax rate. So I wasn't actually able to pay that much off. I still had $150,000 or whatever in law school debt at the time. I dropped out of school without any degree because I got in after my third year of undergrad. I didn't have an undergrad. I dropped out of law school. The only choice I had was to make e-commerce work. Obviously, since then, business took off pretty quickly after that and was going very, very well. When I decided to fully drop out was April 2022. So I always hated winters in Canada. So I started looking at other places I could live and ended up settling on Dubai. So I ended up moving to Dubai in December of 2022. So about a year and a few months after I started my business. And again, that was a gut decision. I had never been to Dubai. I just had this feeling that it seemed from everything I learned online that it was a place to go. So I had this gut feeling that I was going to go there. So I literally just moved there with just a carry-on bag with my laptop, a couple pairs of clothes. And within a few weeks of being in Dubai was actually when I was able to retire my mom. And she hasn't worked a day since. So back when I was living with her during law school, she was working like 3 jobs. She was working as a dental assistant, she was working as a server at night, and then part-time on the weekends to just put food on the table and pay rent. So ever since I moved to Dubai, I've been able to retire her and she's never worked a day in her life again. And ever since I moved to Dubai, things took off very, very quickly. So how I met my wife was actually on X or on Twitter. I would always see her tweets come across my timeline. I think at one point in like that summer of 2022, before I moved to Dubai, I followed her and she didn't follow me back. So after I moved to Dubai, I tweeted something and then she liked it and she followed me. So then I clicked her profile and it said in her bio, like from Canada. And obviously I was from Canada as well, but I was living in Dubai. So I messaged her, I said, "Hey, I'm from Canada, where are you from?" And she's like, "I'm from a small Southern Ontario town, like you wouldn't know what it was." I'm like, "Oh, no way. I'm also from a small Southern Ontario town." And it turned out we actually lived 1 hour away from each other in Ontario, but we had never met. We never knew each other at all. We didn't even have any mutual friends. I don't know how. We never crossed paths. So we started chatting like late December 2022, shortly after I moved to Dubai. So I wasn't going to be back in Canada till that summer in July, like 7 months later. So I didn't want to wait that long to meet her. So she had never actually flown on a plane by herself. So she had never traveled alone. The only time she left North America was to go to Mexico for vacations with her family. She was from a small town. She was very sheltered, grew up with like a very close family that all lived in this little town. She had never really ventured or traveled much. So essentially I told her, "Why don't you just come visit me in Dubai?" Which was insane because she had never flown by herself. So I had to like FaceTime her parents. FaceTime her mom, FaceTime her dad, so they knew I wasn't some crazy person trying to fly her across the world. So I ended up getting her own hotel room in Dubai when she flew over. So she had her own hotel room. I paid for obviously her flights, her travel. I picked her up at the airport, FaceTimed her parents before to make sure everything go well. And at the time, she was doing like neuroscience in her undergrad. She was in like her placement after to essentially get her full-time job when she flew over to visit me. So she flew over for a week. Just to make it simple, she never left. She ended up coming early January of 2023. She never left. We were engaged 2 months later, March 2023, and we ended up getting married in Lake Como the following summer of 2024. And then we actually just 2 days ago welcomed our first son into the world. So everything happened very, very quickly for me after I moved to Dubai. So I moved to Dubai December of 2022, met my wife a month later, January 2023. We were engaged in March 2023, married in Lake Como, summer of 2024, and just had our first son, February of 2025. So life, compared to just a few years ago, is so much different than I could have ever imagined. I think Dubai has really helped me grow up. So back when I lived in Canada, I had a lot of the same friends and stuff. When I was becoming this new entrepreneur person, people would project onto me the person they always thought I was, like a partier and this and that. But when I moved to Dubai, you kind of get a new start. You meet new friends who are doing the same thing as you. Really helps you grow up when you move across the world and you now have a wife and a family to take care of. So my life is literally completely different than just a couple of years ago. I've been able to set up a family foundation here, which is like a trust. Companies have grown insane amounts. Now I have over 60 full-time employees. I have 2 software businesses. Businesses do about $25 million per year. Always looking to start new businesses. Now I'm just really focused on being a great leader for my company, providing for my family, focusing on health, wellness, building up my investing account. And our whole goal now with the education company is to essentially help 1,000 people become millionaires. So yeah, that's my story. I'm very excited about what the future holds in the next decades for myself. I think the number one thing I want to do more that I lack right now is enjoying the moment. And I think having a son has, even in the last few days, helped me enjoy the moment more and really live in the moment, be grateful for now, while still progressing, enjoying the ride. So number one lesson I can give you through all this is, number one, trust your gut. You have a gut feeling. It's usually there for a reason. I think my opinion is your gut is God speaking to you. But one thing you have to be careful of, if you only hear God telling you what to do and you don't hear him telling you what not to do, I think that's a big risk. And just be careful about what it is you're listening to, at least be mindful of it. But overall, I think you already know what to do. You just have to start taking action. And I hope this video here is proof that you too can completely change your life and make your dreams come true. So as I said, just a few years ago, no different than you. I grew up in a tiny town with parents who grew up in the same tiny town. I played hockey a lot when I was younger, which I think helped me get out of the house. But other than that, there's nothing special about me. And I've been able to build the life of my dreams for myself. So if I can do it, then you can too. You just have to trust your gut and start taking action. So I hope that you learning my story and hearing a bit about me and my past and how everything worked out for me is proof that you can do this too. That's all for today. Trust your gut. Cheers.